All right. Well, welcome everybody. It is great to see you on this early morning on Monday. And this is my first multi-guest podcast on the Reaching Higher podcast. So thank you all for being guinea pigs. Arif, Jena, Selin, it's lovely to have you here. And one of the things I want to do is I love to know, especially because my last podcast was all about healthcare. I love to know how people got involved. I know sometimes I had a parent that was a doctor. I had a sick, cousin or grandmother. I just loved it. I love science or whatever. So, Jenna, why don't we start with you? Tell us how you got involved.
Yeah, thank you for your time today. I got involved because my sister, who there's a 10-year age gap, so sometimes I have the misconception that I'm her mom, although I'm not. But she had since the age of 1 epilepsy, and so growing up and watching her struggle, watching my parents struggle to get her on the right medication for her seizures to control them was a large part of my journey of childhood. Oftentimes, I would be left with my sister, and I had to get used to administering the emergency medication that we give to stop seizures. So that was a large reason why I was honing in on pediatrics. Always knew that I wanted to do healthcare. My grandfather was my mentor, and he passed away a few years ago, but he was a pharmacist. So that's how I niched down to not only pharmacy, but also pediatrics.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry about your grandfather as well. Obviously, founding Perfecting Peds is, made us all better for it. So thank you. Celine, why don't we go to you?
Yeah, so I was working at Ernst & Young Transaction Advisor Services and very close to making a partner, working in private equity, have a high-flying life. And my whole goal was to open up my own growth equity fund and invest in companies at different growth stages. However, at that point in time, my uncle has been diagnosed with cancer. That completely changed the trajectory of my life and in my career. And initially, once you're working in these very, cutthroat culture of private equity, and when you have basically fought too much in order to get to the level that you want, you actually don't want to give up. You just want it to continue. But, working on this for my, uncle's journey for about a couple of months and doing my own due diligence, I quickly, recognized that this is not something that I can do in my verbiage with my fingertips. I had to put everything onto this, my heart, my money, my intelligence, my time. And that's how I have made the almost maybe one of the most important decision in my life and in my career, and put my entire journey and career into MassiveBio. But it was not a kind of, I was working on a lemonade stand and at very young age tried to become an entrepreneur. This was something that has been completely driven by my family's history in the world of cancer and my passion to tackle those issues for my family as well as beyond.
Well, again, I'm sorry that you had that happen to you and your family, but I do feel like, again, the world becomes a better place when people are inspired and have these passionate backstories of not just, I'm going to volunteer, I'm going to give $100 a month, but you actually start a company to really improve. Arif, how about you? What got started? What got you headed down this path?
Well, I'm really inspired to hear the stories of my colleagues. I will pile on a little bit too. So I had a lot of other professional plans as well, maybe not as successful as Celine, but I was thinking about some other things. And, my mom had breast cancer. She was diagnosed sort of suddenly, and that kind of flipped a switch for me kind of overnight. So became a medical oncologist to go down that route, but importantly, to focus my career on the experience, not only for patients, but their families, their caregivers, their communities, and to think about the sources of distress that people feel that are beyond biology. Biology is important to solve for, but just like in every other health condition, cancer is not unique. That really outcomes are not only predicated on biology. In fact, most outcomes in cancer are predicated on issues related to access and emotion and logistical issues and relationships and other things. And so that's been the focus of my career, and I'm so excited to see cancer care continue to embrace those aspects of oncology too.
We appreciate that answer for a few different reasons. One, I will also say I am sorry, and the good news though is we will be dropping this later this month, so we will just catch the tail end of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So very germane. And it does lead into the next question around the cancer care, right, and access, because that is such a critical piece that I think a lot of people forget about. So the next question, and I'll start with you, Arif, and we'll work backward on this. If you could pick one thing we could fix today in cancer care, so a moonshot per se, what would that be?
Yeah, I think a moonshot here would be equal attention on the experience, versus sort of the biology. I'd remind everybody that really cancer care, one, is relatively new as a field, and having an armamentarium of treatments, right, is, only about 50 years old. So while the concept of cancer is as old as humanity, our ability to be intentional and deliberate to address it is relatively new. But also, as we think about the innovations that have happened in cancer care, it's tempting to think that those are only on the side of drug development. And I would remind everyone that actually, as new interventions have been developed, there's been a corresponding supportive care innovation that has happened to facilitate the implementation of that intervention. If you look at the 1970s as a breast oncologist, right, we thought that the more you cut, the better you are. We actually realized that paying attention to people as humans means that we can both preserve the function of their arm and reduce their pain, have less morbid of interventions, and yet people do actually better. So we went from a radical mastectomy to a modified radical mastectomy to now really that being quite rare in terms of what we do. But if you also look at some of the newer drugs in the 90s and early 2000s, those would create significant amounts of nausea and vomiting. It was a rate-limiting side effect for most people. And so we couldn't actually make those innovations work until we created the next generation of antiemetics, anti-nausea medicines, right? And so if you look at every step forward in oncology in the R&D side has had a complementary step forward on the humanity side. And I think that's really where we still have further opportunity to go, that as we innovate on one side, let's innovate on the other side as well. And what that does is it brings us to today, where we have more drugs approved than ever before annually. But we're also now embracing this idea that cancer care is a longitudinal illness for many people. It has many sources of suffering and need, and places where compassion can be brought. And so I think that's really what I want everyone to embrace, is that it's more complex than just cells under a microscope.
Thank you for framing that. And anyone watching along with us, I have two cats in my office right now as I'm trying to keep the house quiet, and they are very curious and all over the place. So thank you. I appreciate that very thorough answer. Selin, how about you? What's your moonshot? What's the one thing that if you could fix it today, you would?
I can talk about the oncology clinical trial enrollment. In the oncology clinical trial enrollment, there are three aspects. There's a patient identification, AI-based master pre-screening, and then the last mile. Frankly, the middle one, the AI-based pre-screening, which is typically considered as the patient matching and finding clinical trials for a patient, is, in my perspective, the easiest one, because you leverage the technology. There are significant advancements in the technology. Once you get the medical records and the molecular diagnostic testing, you can do a lot of different things. But to me, the difficult ones is patient identification, as well as on the last mile side, which is also inconsistent with Arif was explaining. So for example, if a patient is going into a medical oncologist, and if this medical oncologist is not necessarily providing enough perspective to the patient on the clinical trials, you need to make sure that, the patient has the options, and you need to create awareness for that patient. And that patient could be anywhere, in the United States or anywhere in the world. So finding that patient, educating that patient about the availability of clinical trials and the additional options that this patient have is one of the ones that's difficult. The other one, which is in fact even more difficult, is what we call is at the last mile. Even a patient is fully eligible for a particular clinical trial, and if this is more like a unicorn patient, you still need to refer the patient to a site and set up a screening appointment. You still need to make sure that there's not a travel and reimbursement issue. You still need to make sure that the patient's insurance is going to be able to cover, because frankly, even the patient is perfectly fitting all the inclusion-exclusion criteria of a clinical trial, you typically lose 75% of the patients from the clinical eligibility to operational feasibility. And that is a very significant factor that needs to get resolved. And in that, era, in the last mile era, there's also an accountability issue. Is it the responsibility of the patient to solve these issues? Is it the responsibility of pharma? Is it the responsibility of the oncologist? Who is actually going to be responsible to take the rein in order to be able to solve these issues? And those are the areas that me and my company are focusing, the basically solving the unseen that is unlocking a significant amount of bottleneck that prevents a large number of cancer patients to participate into the clinical trials. The good news is that the science is there. There is like thousands of clinical trials that are actively recruiting that is waiting for cancer patients to attend. But how we can connect the dots, identify the right patients, making sure that they're not wasting time in the pre-screening, and really doing a very targeted job to put them in front of the site so that there are no further operational issues that prevents them to get into the trial. That is a collective moonshot that I have to get to the primary moonshot.
I love that. And I think a few of you were at the health conference recently, the HLTH. And one of the things that they opened with was Rob Lowe, a gentleman from Lilly who was focused on clinical trials, and then a woman that was a patient that had talked about her experience. And the whole premise was enrolling more people in oncology clinical trials because there are all these great therapies that are out there, but we can't always find bodies. And so one of the things that I am also excited to hear more about is I know I'm going to do a follow-up question with you focusing on AI, which is the buzzword of the day, but a very important technology and some real world data. So Jena, last but not least, let's talk about what your moonshot is. And you come at it from a little bit of a different angle, obviously focusing on the ped element of it.
I am true neuro and psych. So we have amazing pediatric oncology pharmacists. So a lot of these answers are going to be rephrased by them. So shout out to Brian Sabeth and Izzy Lawson. We have a slew of HEMONC pharmacists on our team that help me answer these questions. So really the one moonshot idea would be creating more survivorship clinics. So kind of piggybacking off of what Arif said is that we now have all these amazing drugs that can thank God, can keep us, especially pediatric patients, alive longer and can cure them. But a lot of times when the patients ring the bell, there's so many things that need to happen after that occurs. And so one of the moonshot ideas of our pharmacists on our team was, having those survivorship clinics where the patients, well, we're biased, where the pharmacists work with the PCP or the pediatrician after they ring that bell for the long haul. So we see patients from 2 months all the way up to 24 years. So one of the really cool niches we've been able to fall into is following those kiddos to make sure that drug they got 2 years ago that has side effects is being followed up on. And so we're making sure that they're getting their echoes, getting their EKGs, getting their follow-up labs. And so creating that at a larger scale, we probably have hundreds of oncology patients, and then of those, a couple hundred that have survivorship. And our survivors, our warriors, but really following them at a bigger scale so that we can ensure, that drug that they got, we're not forgetting about it, that they're continuously getting monitored for the long-term side effects that happen with a lot of the oncology that we do give children.
Bless you all for doing that, because I think it's so important to do that longitudinal piece. And I know that's a theme that is coming up, is really it's treating folks and their families as their whole patient and thinking about it beyond just a 3-month, 6-month, 2-year sort of window, and knowing that, we need to sort of continue to follow along. So thank you for that. Arif, I'm going to go back to you, and we're going to talk a little bit about the American Cancer Society. I think a lot of people listening in probably are familiar. But let's talk a little bit about patient expectations around cancer care and how they're evolving, particularly when it comes to, we mentioned this earlier, access, navigation, and support outside of the traditional clinical settings.
Yeah, well, fortunately, cancer is becoming a marathon more than a sprint for a lot of people. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. If you look at, for example, the hospice Medicare benefit was developed in 1983, modeled to this idea that there is a, kind of a dichotomous outcome that you can predict at about 6 months. I mean, that's how that whole thing came together. And so now the good news is we've got a lot more therapeutic options. I've gotten better at supportive care. But what we've not yet solved for is uncertainty and complexity. In fact, we might have introduced more of it in the process. But what's interesting is that cancer care was built around this idea that people would go through episodes probably 4 to 6 months at a time. And for many of my patients, for example, I see patients on Wednesdays. I have a patient coming up that, I've been taking care of for 15 years with metastatic cancer. So that is something that you would not have said even 15 years ago that was possible. I have prepared to say goodbye to this patient, every single time I see her, and every single time I'm glad she continues to come back. And so, but the nature of suffering changes over the transom. And particularly when cancer care is longitudinal, the things that people may face as a challenge is going to change over time. I mean, we say at the American Cancer Society that the need for services really is a function of time. It's not a function of so much socioeconomic status, because the reality is you could be quite wealthy. If I give you a neuroendocrine tumor for 20 years, I can probably change your ability to have financial resilience. And I don't mean me, I mean the cancer is doing that, right? So really, the need for services is a function of time. And at ACS, we do that in a lot of ways that's focused on where people need help. So lodging and transportation services, as an example, means that we have 31 Hope Lodges across the country, which provide free housing to people undergoing cancer care, but also that we're paying attention to food insecurity, loneliness and social isolation, caregiver resilience, that there's these other components that, if not taken care of, will not surprisingly lead to suboptimal outcomes. And so I think at ACS, we've really shifted over the last couple of years, one, to be more across the cancer continuum. So that means that while we've always been focused on early detection and prevention, we now have a bigger focus on the post-diagnosis experience. But also say we expanded to both patients and caregivers. And we have a large component of our work that's focused on healthcare professionals, because fundamentally, to make change that's scalable, you want to help patients as an N of 1, but fundamentally you have to help health systems as an N of 100. And so we take a multi-pronged approach to be able to do that.
I like that. And I think you partly answered my next question around the greatest opportunity to strengthen the patient journey. But one of the ones that maybe you can lean into is partnerships between advocacy organizations, health systems, and technology innovators. I did a podcast at South by Southwest a couple years ago with Dr. K, who was your CEO at the time. So it was ACS, ASCO, and City of Hope. And we talked about how important these partnerships were. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and what the greatest opportunities are there?
Yeah, I mean, partnerships are key. I mean, there's a couple sort of trends that are certainly happening in the cancer space, and my colleagues can speak to more. But, on the early detection side, I mean, we're starting to see that radiologically centered early detection, that would mean, mammograms and CT scans for lung cancer, are going to continue to be complemented by other types of modalities. They're going to be blood-based modalities, breath-based modalities, et cetera, and even more conveniently used radiologic modalities. And so as part of that, we're seeing cancer care move to non-traditional settings. A lot of cancer screening is actually done in the home, if you think about it. So you can do colon cancer screening at your own home through DNA-based tests. The FDA recently approved office-based self-collection for HPV. One could imagine that that's going to eventually get to person-based, patient-based self-collection for HPV, right? So now you're starting to think about more things happening in a home-like environment or home setting. There's cancer centers, they're doing 10 to 15% of their infusional therapy in the home too. It's a patient safety issue. It's a patient convenience issue. It's also a supply chain issue. And so you need the right partnerships to kind of put all that together to make it feasible and safe. But imagine people are getting chemotherapy in their home today. That's absolutely what's happening. We know with the work Selin's doing, increasing access to clinical trials is really important too. And for many of these trials, it's not that that the patient goes to the trial, but the trial can come to the patient, thinking about different ways that happens. At the Hope Lodge at ACS, we allow for clinical trial activities to occur. In fact, we are working on some architectural renderings of our next Hope Lodges we're going to build, and all of them have day clinic spaces in them. They have clinical trial enrollment spaces in them. That is so that we can meet patients where they are. So I think the partnership piece is really important, because ACS cannot do its work without partnerships, nonprofit, corporate, and others. And to be where the puck is going, we have to see the intelligence that others are seeing ahead of us. I mean, oftentimes we are not the ones up on the balcony seeing how the world is moving, for example, in various places. And so partnerships gives us a lot of insight and intelligence into that. And then we can fundamentally be a convener, a funder, a collaborator, but we don't always have to build things on our own. And I think that's been a bit of the pivot we've taken in the last couple of years as well.
thank you all for all you do at the American Cancer Society and everything that, MassiveBio and Perfecting Peds does. Selin, I do want to transition to you because Arif, sort of brought it up, but MassiveBio has focused on improving clinical trial recruitment for oncology patients in particular. And it is one of those things where it continues to need more love, and the more love we can give to it, the better. So let's talk about what innovations or data-driven strategies are proving most effective in connecting the right patients to the right trials faster. And just as a little bit of nod, I think I read a stat that said you have over 160,000 patients engaged and matched across 17 countries. So, wow, that's amazing. Yes, Jenna's clapping her hands. I'm clapping my hands. Tell us a little bit more about the improving clinical trial process and the innovations there.
Yeah, so there are three layers at this point in time. The first layer is on the patient matching and pre-screening. So that is where, frankly, the augmentation of technology is the easiest and the largest amount of impact, because in order to be able to pre-screen a patient manually with their medical records and molecular diagnostic testing, it takes about 25 minutes. And if you try to do that for 14,000 actively recruiting trials at clinicaltrials.gov, it takes more than 8.09 months, which means that, if you're a cancer patient, you have to wait more than 8 months in order to be able to identify your options for a clinical trial. And that's a very large amount of journey, or that's a very long amount of journey for a cancer patient, even for everyone. So in that sense, reducing that to the matter of minutes, or in the fact that seconds, by leveraging the artificial intelligence, using large language models to structure that information on the patient side as well as on the clinicaltrials.gov side, that is a very clear and the most impactful version of how to handle that. The second part is on the patient identification, like looking at some of the predictive analytics and understanding when is going to be the next progression of a particular cancer patient, especially, for example, this patient is a multiple myeloma patient where the progression takes time. Identifying the progression cycle of that patient and engaging that patient at the right time with the right tools is very important and fundamental to change that patient's journey. And then the last part is on the last mile side, although that is being more considered as a service business. In order for the scalability of that, there are two things that happens. There's patient engagement as well as provider engagement, and providing the patients and the providers the tool in order for them to be able to have the higher level of connectivity with MassiveBio or any vendor that they're working, and having consistent follow-ups. And, because this is a journey, this is not just like a one time, and having the information exchange and providing a 724 support real time with the support of technology and the connectivity with the right stakeholders is where the importance of the technology resides. And also try to bring the scalability aspect is very important. And one final thing is that, we do all these things in the patient journey, but in my perspective, it is also very, very important to learn from that patient journey, both from a clinical as well as operational standpoint, to improve the population level of that patient journey over time. It's not about, improving one patient's journey. It's also learning very significantly from that individual patient's journey to create an impact for the next generation of patients. And I think that's also where the role of AI is very important to enable us for that learning aspect and helping on a mass scale over time.
I appreciate you leaning into that answer and just how thorough that was, and how all this technology is helping us improve this process. And I did have a follow-up question that was sort of leaning more into the long-term patient engagement. I think you touched on that. Maybe if you're open to it, because Arif talked a little bit about this, is the partnership piece. Tell us a little bit about that importance of partnerships, and I don't know, where you are on your journey in terms of creating these partnerships, or what you can say publicly. But I'd have to imagine that's a really important piece. You mentioned the payer provider piece, right? Like that's a critical one. But talk a little bit about the importance of partnerships to your side of the business.
Well, I think what I can tell you, I cannot emphasize enough the importance and the value of partnerships. If you think about the patient enrollment value chain, there's the identification, matching, and the last mile piece. Right now, the largest number of partnerships that we have is on the identification piece. Because the thing is that we're a young company. We can only, punch above our weight to a certain extent. But at the same time, we need the, master pre-screening for patients to clinical trials without them going into a hospital, starting from their living room, is something that needs to get into the minds and the workflow of every single cancer patient. Because historically, one human being was one human being. Now, one human being plus one mobile phone is one human being almost. So what I'm trying to do is that, one cancer patient plus MassiveBio, so that those cancer patients are getting the opportunity to be evaluated for clinical trials almost the moment after that they have heard the word of they have been diagnosed with cancer. On the partnership side, there are two categories of partnerships. One category of partnerships are the patient advocacy groups. So for example, American Cancer Society, they're doing an extraordinary job in order to be able to create awareness on the patients, the importance of participation of clinical trials. And we have another 416 strategic partnerships. The other type of partnerships are more on the the business enterprises, in the sense that specialty pharmacies, payer prior authorization unit, diagnostic laboratories, those are the interesting layers of access for large amount of patients. When a patient goes and there's a drug that has been dispensed at a pharmacy, then we need to make sure that if that drug that has been dispensed is the appropriate drug for the prior treatment that's necessary for the inclusion-exclusion criteria for a particular trial, so that we can pre-identify that that patient has the potential in order to participate on that particular trial. However, on those partnerships, it's not just a partnership. There is also innovation that needs to happen in the operating model of how to make that partnerships work, because specialty pharmacies, diagnostic laboratories, payers, they're not in the business of finding patients for clinical trials, or they're not in the business of surfacing patients for clinical trials. So we have to innovate, educate, and make sure that those models are operationalizable, and then we need to scale. So that's kind of the thing that it takes time. It's not about the, making the partnership that takes time. It's that new model of a partnership, and deployment of that new model takes time, and it needs to go into a couple of iterations, because there are certain things that I was talking about 3 years ago. People thought that I kind of lost my mind, but frankly, those things became an absolute reality in the last 6 months. So we have to, push, but, especially on the patient advocacy side, the work that the American Cancer Society is doing and some of the other, groups, it is absolutely phenomenal in order to be able to create that level of awareness on the cancer patients about these free resources for them to access to clinical trials.
Well, I love the framework, and so that's a great way to think about partnerships. And speaking of innovative, Jena, I like this next question. I did not make it up. A friend, Brian Urban, did. But because of the fact that you don't come from a specific oncology lens in terms of what Perfecting Peds does, but as someone leading a company and founding a company that personalizes care for children, how do you think lessons from pediatric care journeys can inform a broader oncology care system, especially when it comes to patient-centered engagement?
First off, our partnerships are with health plans. So health plans usually distill down their sickest, most chronic children. We've been heavy in the neuro and psych space, and we're actually, excitingly, really over the past 6 months, starting to edge our way into the oncology space, which is really exciting. What we do is we partner with these patients for the long haul. And as I say to the parents, we're your ultimate pediatric pharmacist dork in your pocket. And so we say, call us for anything. Now, specifically with these oncology patients, what we're seeing, as Arif stated, a lot of these medications are going to be given in your home, right? So I'm a mom of 3 girls, and I don't think there's really anything worse you could say to me as a caregiver than your child has cancer. Very limited things. And so that shock is one. And then you're on top of it going through the treatments your child's going to get, which even as a pediatric pharmacist are confusing. And then we're then we're done. Then we're letting them go home and they're supposed to absorb all of that. And so really where we're finding our niche is that those caregivers, when they go home, they're like, what was just told to me? What just happened? And so a lot of times these medications come from whether it's, the old as OG chemotherapy or the new, more innovative cutting edge oncology treatments that we're coming up with. A lot of times they're given in the home, and the parents want to talk to somebody again to make sure that they have all their questions answered before they administer it to their child. So I'm not poking holes in any sort of specialty pharmacy, but a lot of times you call and you're going around like an entire phone tree trying to get a hold of a pharmacist, let alone a pharmacist that's trained in pediatric oncology. And so what we're able to do is we have our very amazing pediatric oncology pharmacists that they're on call for you. And they're going to take their time. So our sessions are anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes, depending on whether it's initial or follow-up. And we're going to go through everything again and very slowly and provide everything also in written documentation. So they can ask us a million times, how am I administering it? Which is always a fun riddle in the pediatric population as compared to the adults. They can ask, how am I storing the med? What are the side effects I'm going to look for? And then if they identify the side effects, what are they going to do? And really just to have somebody that's available to them that they can call, email, text. That's really going to be a truly accessible pharmacist working with not only the oncologist, but God forbid they have a neurologist, psychiatrist, primary care doc, cardiologist, and making sure that all the regimens blend together when there is such high risk medications involved like chemotherapy.
Jena, thank you. I love that idea of being that sort of neural system and connecting all of those dots for people and treating people like people. I know my wife, God love her, has spent endless hours on those phone trees with pharmacies trying to navigate. I almost can tell all the prompts just by what she's going through, right? I do want to go to this next question, which is what role nurse-led or clinician-led navigation plays in bridging the gap between highly technical oncology advances and then the lived experiences, which I think all of you have touched on a little bit, like, again, treating people like human beings of patients and families.
Once we're given this patient, usually by way of the health plan, the first thing we do is set up a 45-minute to an hour intake where we're getting to know everything about the patients. And so we're getting to know how they're eating, how they're stooling, all their meds, all their chronic conditions, really looking at them from a holistic standpoint. I will never, even if a health plan asks me, and I'm turning down a ton of money, do a disease-focused program. What I mean by that is I'm never going to have our pharmacists just look at the oncology piece. We're going to look at it from a complete lens of the whole medication regimen, making sure that oncology medication isn't interacting or causing effects on any of the other drug regimen that is obviously important as well. With that, we identify what's called a lot of, usually on average with our patients, an average of 13 various drug therapy problems. They can be really small things, or they can be very big, impactful changes that can really avoid ER visits and hospitalizations. But of those things, we're going to then, the pharmacist, pass it off to our care managers, who are amazing pediatric trained nurses that make our recommendations come to life. And like I said, the real value add here is knowing how to quarterback amongst all the medications and being that person that can really weave into whatever subspecialties medications they're prescribing and know what's, validating that each med is needed. If it's needed, is it safe, effective, and convenient? And then that extra layer of making sure not only the patient's safe, but the entire family is on board and aware of what has to happen. Like Selin said, like Arif said, it's so much more. There's so many other things that a lot of times we don't think of when we think oncology. Like, okay, they're paying for some of these treatments out of pockets. Like we just had somebody who couldn't afford their gas bill. How are we going to get that? How are we going to get transportation? And so the blend of pharmacists working with our amazing care managers really allows us to help triage any issue that they're having.
Well, I do want to get to some fun questions as we wrap up. I know we're bumping up against time. The way I'm going to do this is I have 4 questions, and so I'm going to actually just have each of you answer all 4 together. And the idea is we're going to do this rapid fire. So, each one 5-10 seconds. So, Selin, why don't we start with you? So, first concert.
So I was born and raised in Turkey. So there was this very famous Turkish singer. That was my first concert that I went to. I was probably, very, very young at a high school age. People would know because it was in Turkey.
You'll have to send me the answer. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes. So if someone wants to explore new music, they can. Someone living or from the past that you'd most like to meet.
I always have the desire to meet with, frankly, Jeff Bezos, because I really admire what he has done in the Amazon and, how he has really kind of went into these data-driven structure in order to be able to, create one of the most delightful experiences for the customers. So that level of mega scalability is something that I definitely would love to learn. And in order to learn from, I think I always think about meeting him and having a conversation. And frankly, how to adapt that thing to a mass scale for cancer patients is what I'm really, really, striving for.
Well, he's one individual that has definitely figured out the scale game. So that's a good one. What's one thing that people don't know about you that you'd be willing to share?
Well, I actually like dancing, salsa dancing, although I am not very good at it, but I'm an inspiring dancer, and I don't think that I'm going to give up until I get some level of an advancement in my dancing career.
Well, I love you sharing, and I love the fact that you're, self-aware enough to say I'm not very good at it, but you still love it, which is the most important piece.
No, it sucks a little bit, but I'm still inspired to do it.
That's awesome. And then one last one is one piece of advice you'd love to give to your younger self.
I think it's all about resilience. Like there's going to be thousands of things that's going to happen outside your control. That's going to fail in certain areas that you are not responsible for. But not, giving up on that resilience. I think if I think about the MassiveBio and what we're building in here, if there's one word, frankly, that defines our journey, it's the word of resilience. Never and ever give up for the things that's outside your control. Just try to focus on what you can control. And I think the world recalibrates itself after that.
Well, it's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. Arif, why don't we bounce to you? So first concert.
Yeah, growing up in rural Missouri, all my concerts were at the county fair or the state fair, so not surprising. It was both Kenny Chesney and the Goo Goo Dolls as a teenager in the '90s. Those are classics, I think, and still today, I think represent good music.
Yes, no, that's good. Someone living your past you'd like to meet.
I think it's between Sun Tzu, the Chinese general, and Gandhi. Both are sort of attributed with talking about kind of change management. The concept, first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, then you win, I think is apropos to a lot of things we're doing in healthcare today. So I take those words to heart. I'd love to ask them a little bit more pointed advice about how to apply that to the challenges we have today.
Well, what I appreciate about the answer is Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War, and then Gandhi, who's sort of the epitome of peace, right? So talk about the yin and the yang. So great choices. What's one thing people don't know about you that you'd be willing to share?
I'm a pretty decent trumpet player, taking off Selin's sort of humanities and arts. I think for those of us in the hard sciences, it's great to find an outlet. And I am a dad of 2 kids, and my 13-year-old has picked up the trumpet, and I now live vicariously through her really good embouchure and ability to hit notes above the staff, which I've not been able to in a while. So it's fun to watch that.
Very cool. And last one piece of advice you'd love to give to your younger self.
Yeah, at the high level, I like what Selin said too. We have in our house a sign that I got made on Etsy. It's a sort of a rabbit hole I went down. It says, I think it's attributed to various different people, but it essentially says it'll all be fine in the end, and if it's not yet fine, it's not yet the end. And we use it as sort of a family motto. More granularly, though, when it comes to day-to-day stuff, I remind colleagues and myself that never take no from a person not in a position to give you a yes. No. So when you run up against a no, ask yourself, could that person have said yes? Oftentimes they could not have. And so their no is a soft no. Go find the person that can give you the yes.
Great advice. So thank you for sharing that. All right, Jena, bring us home here. So first concert for you.
Probably anticipated answer. As a girl growing up in Philly in the 90s, NSYNC. So
I thought you were going with the I'm in Jersey, so the Bruce Springsteen piece. So I like the NSYNC one. That's a good curveball.
I should have said that, but yeah, no, NSYNC and Britney Spears, kind of what you would expect for the 90s of my in Philly, all the big concerts.
Those are way more fun than Bruce. No disrespect to Bruce, but I love those answers from you. All right, someone living or past you'd like to meet.
Mel Robbins. So I do a lot of mindset, and I just love how continuously positive she is. And if you know her journey, it's even cooler. I saw her speak one time. Fun fact, this could be my random fact people don't know about me. But to go part-time in the hospital as a pediatric pharmacist, I sold skincare for 3 years and did really well and built an entire team of 50 plus women, which rolled into then me having an entrepreneurial spirit. But as part of that, I heard her speak and hearing about her hardships and how she's been able to the various ways that are really easy to take and implement into your own life to create positive changes is awesome. So I would love to meet her.
Well, that's a good one, and I appreciate the pragmatic answer there. So we'll do the one piece of advice you'd love to give to your younger self before we wrap up.
Stop caring what people think. Like in my 30s, Amen. I don't care. I don't care what you think. It's so liberating, right? Like you're so much of a happier person when you genuinely like what I post. I don't care if I get a mean, angry troll on my inbox. You know, what I do, I don't care if you agree with me or not. And so like living like that was such an intricate part of my entrepreneurial journey. Because just like Selin said, so many people tell me, you're boiling the ocean. You're a mom. You're not going to be able to do this. Don't tell VCs you're a mom. You know, you're so like all the stories. So I think just like not caring and being myself has been the best, most freeing thing in life. And I wish my younger self knew that.
Well, amen to that. And I think you're probably still young enough where you have a lot of runway still to imply that. And with that, we'll wrap up. So Selin, Jena, Arif, thank you so much for taking the time today, for doing what you do for pediatric and cancer care. And I know that people are going to love this episode. So thank you again.
Thank you, Aaron, for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron.